Here we are again for the first time. The CB rework is finally upon us, and it's time to get ready for it, especially for AA ships. Now, each public test has seen major changes, so it's a little too early to discuss the merits of specific ships, since Wargaming will probably have a round of numbers tweaks before going live. What we can talk about quite a bit is the nature of how AA works. Now, the core mechanics of the RTS AA system have been completely discarded, and while some things like the sector management system have been on YouTube and on the forums and on Reddit discussed heavily, a lot of the less visible parts have escaped notice. So here we are. This video is aimed at players intending to either start the CV lines from scratch, or, even more importantly, players with no interest in trying CVs at all. Now, why would you sit down and make a video for players about CVs that have no interest in playing CVs? Because there's a lot of things going on in the new AA system, and players need to see what's happening from both sides at least once to understand what their AA is really doing. Now, also, the new AA system is a little bit more advanced than just get skills and modules equals better AA equals profit. Modules and skills do different things for your AA beyond the old range and damage system. Knowing how your AA works will help you make better decisions on which modules and skills to take for specific ships, because not all of them are good for all ships anymore. Now, as mentioned, the old system was an old RNG system that pitted damage against airplane health and makes a single roll to determine if the plane is lost. The new system has specific plane hit points for each individual aircraft, and then it summarizes all of those into a squadron pool that the carrier player sees. Damage is done in two ways. First, passive AA deals X damage with a percentile hit chance and cannot be evaded while the flight is in range. So the game makes a roll. If it rolls yes, one of the airplanes takes damage. There's nothing the carrier player can do about it. Now, there's also a flak system, which is completely new, which will throw up big clouds of smoke and metal debris, and if the player tries to avoid it and fails, or misses it entirely, or decides to fly through it, they can take a whole lot of damage very quickly and lose one or more airplanes with a single mistake. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in detail. There's also a short, medium, and long-range increment system, but that'll come later. So first, we're going to go through and examine the values and function of the passive AA system, because that was much easier to isolate and test, especially at the lower tiers. Before we get into that, though, quick warning to viewers: the footage you're about to see has been sped up to 3x speed, and while I needed to do that in order to convey my point quickly, editing the video and watching it over and over and over again for mistakes has driven home to me it might cause vertigo and motion sickness in viewers. I'd suggest either watching this on a smaller screen if you have one available, or just scrolling down so you can only see the play bar if those things worry you. I don't think they'll affect most people, but I wanted to get a warning out there in advance that, hey, if you are prone to motion sickness, please be advised you're going to see things that will probably make you motion sick in the next 10 minutes. I will try to cover everything I can with just audio, and I will have all of the data I've produced in links in the description, but I needed to get this out there where people could see it, because if you don't see what is happening to the airplanes, you're not going to understand what your AA is doing. So, quick warning, in 3 seconds we're going to start video. 3, 2, 1. So, why passive AA first? Passive is a bit more of a numbers game, like the old RTS AA, so it's easier to compare like to like. Also, after flipping through all of the AA of ships on the public test server 3 from tier 6 and down, there were very few with only passive, but there were none with only flak. The Shenyang here has a very strong passive AA for tier, as shown on screen. For only having passive AA, it has very good passive AA. What you have then is a line of DDs providing the strongest available passive AA environment for me to fly through. Oh, and this host show I'm using has a 0-point captain and nothing that boosts plane survivability. You'll see me making attack passes through the AA. This has no impact on the function of passive AA, but it was the best way for me to keep the planes as exposed to the AA as long as possible to accelerate the demo. As I fly, the damage will accumulate and I will start to lose airplanes. When the first plane of a group is lost, I'll overlay a short data table to the video. I'll show the individual and group starting hit points for the squadron, and more importantly, I will include the flight's total health after each aircraft loss, both as a flat value and as a percentage of the starting flight health. This might sound tedious, and wow, was it tedious to put together, but worth it for what I confirmed in the end. I'll be sending 4 waves like this, starting with dive bombers, then torpedo planes, then rocket planes, and then again with dive bombers. Keep in mind this is nothing like AA in a real match, even against bots. It takes a while because the test is isolating a single mechanic. Flak is the stronger side of AA in the new system, but it's how they interact together that matters most. Now, as far as I could find on the PTS, if planes were in range of your AA at all, you had some kind of passive AA firing. Short-range AA was exclusively passive, or at least I couldn't find an exception. This means that any flight passing over you or attacking you is going to be exposed to your heaviest passive AA. Dive bombers will be affected the most as they slow down and linger inside of short-range AA, often for their entire dive. But as noted, most ships have a passive AA value included in all of their AA auras. Usually short range is where the strongest passive AA was on a ship. Some ships, like Yamato, have passive AA that does as much damage as Flak, but with a low hit chance. Others, like USNDDs, have a low passive damage of 10, even at high tiers, but also have a 100% hit chance. Players will note that fewer skills and modules buff all AA at the same time. For example, basic firing training now only gives a boost to passive AA, whereas advanced firing training on the public test server only gave a bonus to flak damage. Note that their effects on main battery and secondary guns, though, were unchanged. Another thing that has seen changes is the sector system. I don't want to break into a sector system tutorial, but I can cover some basics. The tilde key to the left of the 1 key, at least on my keyboard, brings up a green circle interface where the player can focus his AA to port or starboard. This is a replacement for the manual AA system on RTS, where you could control-click on a specific squadron and focus all your AA there. Originally on PTS-1, the sector functioned as a boost to the quantity of flak fired, and flak fired only. After PTS-2, Wargaming decided that on some ships the sector boost added too much flak and became completely undodgeable, and therefore threw up walls that the carrier could not avoid no matter what their skill level was. On PTS-3, the sector bonus was changed to a boost to damage instead, and I believe affects both passive and flak now. Until I have the live version in front of me, I'll be limited to speculation on how effective builder tactics might be, and guessing wouldn't be fair to you. Now that we have 3 data tables, we can start talking about the numbers. You've probably noticed that it seems to take a while for the first plane in a group to be shot down. Passive AA is distributed very evenly among an air group. 38% after the first plane loss in our dive bomber group was actually an outlier in the test that I ran. That said, so was the 7% first kill in the torpedo group. I suspect higher health per plane and smaller groups help AA distribute so evenly. Anecdotally, I'd say the first plane lost in a group left the squadron in a 25 to 35% health range. What's so important about this? Viewed from the enemy team, I flew through all that AA for several minutes before I started taking losses. Passive AA alone is a very reliable way to do damage, but it's also a slow burn. For a while it seems like nothing is happening, and then it starts bringing down planes fairly quickly. Even while the passive AA is doing its job well, it takes a while before the effects can start to be felt by the surface defender. This is compounded by the fact that only the carrier can see his squadron's health totals. Ships can only see an air group's number of aircraft. There's no way to see a health status overlay. That isn't to say there's no indicator, though. Damaged planes leave a smoke trail. Orange hit point planes leave a white smoke trail, and red hit point planes leave a black smoke trail, in addition to being on fire. These smoke trails are a visual indicator on the squadron's hit points, even if it's not precise. Some of you might be thinking, hey, that means my AA does nothing. This is not the case at all. Passive AA is only part of the new AA model. For the rest, we have to examine flak. Moving on, I have the same skillless Hosho headed off to engage a single enemy with flak. It takes me a minute to find him, and I settle my Hosho in by an island. Flak was a bit harder to test than passive. Low passive AA was a must, but I also wanted all the flak bursts to have consistent damage. Most ships use all three zone ranges, and medium and long range flak usually have different values. I should probably talk more about that now. AA is broken into three ranges just as before: short, medium, and long. Short range AA is exclusively passive AA, or at least it was on everything I checked. I checked a lot of ships in port. Medium and long tend to incorporate both passive and flak AA. A friend of mine was concerned that there would be gaps in AA if a ship was missing medium or short. This is not the case. The Z-52, if I remember correctly, has no short range AA at all, but still has a minimum range of 0 kilometers on its medium zone. And our sample ship has no medium range AA at all, which is why I chose it. Speaking of our sample ship, you may have noticed what it is and been a bit surprised. That's right, it's a Tier 1 Chengen. The lack of medium range AA means I know the bot is throwing flak that does 1,330 damage. Also, the radius of the long range AA is very wide, meaning it's easier to hang out in and draw fire. This is where I should point out that this test is not at all organic, even compared to the passive AA tests. Not only am I drawing fire here, I am actively trying to fly into the flak burst. Badly at the start. This is my first and only flak AA test, even though it is longish. I get better at turning into AA as we go. I'm facing a single target with no other enemies on the map. He's taking no action at all besides letting his AA run, and I haven't attacked him even once. You may think that last point isn't as important, but CV attacks by nature force the planes to fly in a line and take damage. They also put you on the other side of the target. If a CV starts an attack not noticing or caring what is beyond his target, then that will be very bad for his airplanes when the flak zone starts to overlap. Oh, and I should have mentioned earlier, a ship's own AA zones do not overlap. This means that flak from your long-range aura will not track targets inside of its minimum range. Separate AA zones on paper sound like a disadvantage, but having played the PTS I no longer feel this is the case. When a flight passes from long-range to medium-range auras, it means the attack timer is fresh on the medium AA and you get burst right away. Often this will happen during an attack, which is when the CV will least want to see a sudden new burst. The same thing happens again as the squadron passes over the target and back into the long-range aura. Fresh attack timer puts up new bursts. Also, separate auras make it nearly impossible to avoid AA by attacking with multiple CV wings, since they will be passing through the AA auras at different times. In the middle of the test I encountered a problem. Below and to the right of my flight information, you can see my CV's deck status. After I launch Wave 7, which is a group of rocket planes, you'll note that I don't have a full replacement of any group. I have completely stripped a Tier 4 carrier of all of its airplanes. You may have noticed before I was launching groups based on availability halfway through, but now I cannot launch a full squadron. While this is a forced test as noted, this is exactly the kind of thing that could happen to a carrier on the PTS if he had a chasing ship with high AA. The recovery time was long enough that I edited it out, but I wanted to leave this here to show the consequence of shooting down aircraft. If a CV keeps using the same type over and over, even light losses will force them to change types after 3 or 4 launches. Full deck wipes seemed uncommon on PTS-3, but a CV's mistakes could easily put him in a position where he had to start using half squads for the last 7 minutes. This means that a CV cannot infinitely harass a single target with one plane type if the defenders force any losses. And this is a Tier 4 CV, where replacement is easiest, at least on the PTS-3. Okay, I'm going to stop being coy for the last dataset and show it all at once instead of one at a time. I've continued highlighting examples where 2 or more aircraft are lost at once. This is the value of flak, and something that did not exist in RTS. In the first half of flak testing, 7 pairs of aircraft were brought down together in 6 waves. Only waves 1 and 3 were spared this, mostly because they experienced more passive AA than the others. The second half of the flak demo was even more pronounced. In 6 flights of 30 planes, only 7 were brought down in singles. We also have 5 instances of planes being brought down in trios. Consider that an attack from a dive bomber group uses 2 planes, and a rocket group uses 3. Waves 8, 10, 12, and 13 probably lost entire attacks to AA. This is commonplace with the new flak system, even against bots. Air groups that take flak bursts almost always take losses. Wave 12 was profound. The first flak burst wounded the whole group and turned it orange. The second brought down the whole squadron. Losses of every kind hurt the CV. Unlike RTS where carrier could loiter empty planes for spotting, every plane in the squadron still has its ordnance. Shooting them down either reduces the number or strength of the air attacks for that group, and it puts strain on the CV's deck. In the Wave 12 example, all 3 planes were lost at once. 2 flak bursts could have prevented 3 attacks, and also stack on the CV's recovery timer. So, what do we have now then? The old AA system, in effect, was a chip damage system. If your AA was good enough to roll hits on an attacker, you would get plane kills. Improving your AA meant that you got plane kills faster, like increasing the tempo on a song. This meant that low AA ships would struggle to shoot down any planes at all, while high AA ships could devour an attack with little counterplay, with one exception. I'm looking at you, Midway. Also, because you were usually swarmed by squadron, old manual AA was essential for targeting the biggest threat to you. Range was also important because aircraft always attacked the target and went back in the direction they came. In retrospect, in this they behaved more like attack helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft. The new AA isn't just a numbers change. It's a dual attack system that will feel very different to users. You'll wonder if your AA is having any effect, and then suddenly get a bunch of kills that register almost at the same time. In the top right, ships now have an AA damage counter. Keep an eye on that for feedback. If the ticker rises slow, you are doing passive damage. A flak hit will make the counter jump. I should note that at higher tiers, ships like BBs use passive AA's burst damage. On the public test server, the Yamato's short AA had over 1,000 damage per tick, but a low hit percent, meaning its passive AA could down whole planes that flew overhead. In short though, if your AA doesn't start chipping away and giving you kills the moment a squadron moves into range, that's okay. It's working as intended. The new system flak means plane kills will, for the most part, come in quick bursts.